The January wind cut through Warren Hodges' wool coat like a blade as he stood in St. Andrew's parking lot, holding the heavy church door open. His calloused hands, 40 years of machinist work etched into every crease, gripped the cold metal handle that burned against his palm. The elderly Asian woman with the walker smiled up at him, her fingers moving in quick, graceful signs. "Thank you." Warren nodded, uncertain but kind. The smell of burnt coffee and wet wool drifted from the fellowship hall behind him. "She doesn't need your help." Diane's voice cracked across the parking lot like a whip. Every head turned. Warren's wife stood beside her Lexus, one manicured finger pointed at him like an accusation. "Stop embarrassing us." The woman, Margaret, he'd learn later, watched Diane's mouth move with the focused attention of someone reading more than words. Near Diane's car, a younger man with two white teeth leaned close, whispering something. Kyle Brennan. Warren didn't know the name yet. Didn't know his BMW or his bank job, or the way he looked at Diane like she was already his. Warren's hand went to his shirt pocket, where his grandfather's micrometer rested like a talisman. He'd been measuring tolerances his whole life. He just hadn't known his marriage was out of true. That evening, he found shredded paper in the burn barrel behind his workshop. One fragment showed his own signature. Another read, "Hodge Family Farm." Warren stood in his workshop, the diesel heater ticking as it fought against the cold seeping through the metal walls. The smell of machine oil and old coffee hung in the air, familiar, comforting in a way his own house hadn't been for months, maybe years. He set the paper fragments on his workbench under the harsh LED lamp. The edges were clean, precise, industrial shredder, cross-cut pattern. Someone had been thorough. His fingers found the micrometer in his pocket again. Grandfather's tool, brass and steel, worn smooth by 3 generations of Hodge hands. Warren pulled it out, turned it over in the light. The measurements were still crisp, 0 to 1 inch, graduated in thousandths. When he was 19, right after his father put a shotgun in his mouth over farm debt, Warren had learned that precision mattered. Measure twice, cut once. The only philosophy that had never failed him. Until maybe now. He heard Diane's car pull into the driveway. The Lexus she'd bought last year without asking him. Just came home with it one Tuesday. Warren glanced at the kitchen window. Through the bare branches of the oak tree, he could see her silhouette in the phone's glow. Talking to someone? Laughing? She didn't laugh with him anymore. Warren turned back to his bench, started cleaning tools he'd already cleaned twice this week. Habit. Routine. The lathe, the drill press, the rows of calipers hanging on pegboard hooks. Everything organized by size, by function, by the logic of a man who understood that chaos was just poor planning. The kitchen door opened, closed, footsteps across the mudroom tile. Silence. Warren counted to 30, then walked inside. Diane stood at the kitchen sink, her back to him, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was hushed, intimate, the kind of voice Warren remembered from 30 years ago, when she used to call him at the shop just to say she missed him. "I know," she was saying. "I know. It's just—" Warren's boot scraped against the threshold. Diane spun, her face cycling through surprise, guilt, then landing on irritation. "I have to go," she said into the phone. Quick, clipped. She ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. "Who was that?" Warren asked. Wrong number. She turned to the sink, started rinsing a coffee cup that was already clean. Her shoulders were tight, defensive. "Sounded like you knew them." "Jesus, Warren. Do you have to interrogate me about everything?" She shut off the water hard enough that the pipes rattled. "I'm going to bed." She brushed past him, trailing a cloud of White Diamond's perfume. Sickly sweet, too much of it. The bedroom door closed. Not quite a slam, but close enough. Warren stood in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. On the counter, Diane's phone screen was still glowing. He could see the edge of the call log. 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Wrong number. He went back to the workshop. The micrometer felt heavier than usual as Warren turned it over in his hands. 3 a.m. Couldn't sleep. The space heater glowed orange in the corner, and outside the January wind made the barn door creak on its hinges. He'd been thinking about the shredded paper, about Diane's phone call, about the way Kyle Brennan had looked at him in the church parking lot. Not with anger or even dislike, but with assessment, the way you'd look at a fence post that needed replacing. Warren set the micrometer on the bench and reached for the shoebox on the top shelf. Inside were the farm documents he'd been meaning to organize for years. The original deed from 1948, his grandfather's name in careful cursive. Partnership agreements from when he'd tried to expand the operation in the 80s. Tax records. Insurance papers. He pulled out the deed, unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed, brittle at the creases. There, in the middle. Said land cannot be sold outside the Hodge family line without written consent of all blood heirs. His grandfather had been specific about that. The land stayed in the family. Always. Warren folded the deed, put it back in the box, pushed the box to the rear of the shelf, behind a coffee can full of sorted bolts. Outside, gravel crunched under tires. Warren checked his watch, 3:17 a.m. He moved to the small window, careful to stay in shadow. A BMW rolled past the workshop, headlights off, moving slow. It parked behind the barn, out of sight from the house. Warren's chest tightened. He watched the driver's door open. Kyle Brennan stepped out, checked his phone, then walked toward the farmhouse's back door. Diane must have been waiting, because the door opened before Kyle could knock. They disappeared inside together. Warren stood at the window for a long time, his hand wrapped around the micrometer so tight his knuckles ached. On the workbench, the shredded paper fragments lay under the lamp like pieces of a puzzle he was just beginning to understand. In the burn barrel tomorrow, he'd find more. Sunday came again. Warren sat in his usual pew, third from the back on the right side, where his father used to sit and his grandfather before that. The church smelled like old hymnals and lemon furniture polish. Organ music hummed through the floorboards as Marcy Stevens practiced the prelude, her fingers finding the wrong notes more often than the right ones lately. Diane hadn't come. Headache, she'd said that morning, not looking up from her phone. After the service, Pastor Ray Mullins found Warren by the coffee station in the fellowship hall. Ray was 68, white beard, still wore work boots under his vestments from his carpentry habit, former union organizer, back when Deere still ran 3 shifts. "Walk with me a minute," Ray said. They went outside, away from the clusters of people trading gossip over styrofoam cups. The cold air tasted like snow coming. "Don't let them make you small," Ray said quietly. He pulled his coat tighter. "I've been hearing things about last week, about you." "What kind of things?" "The kind that aren't true." Ray looked at him directly. "Marcy Stevens has been busy. Coffee hour committee, prayer chain, telling folks you've been acting strange, aggressive toward Diane." Warren felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. "Your wife's been asking about changing the church directory," Ray continued. "Wanted your name removed as deacon. I told her no, but Warren, half the council wants to discuss it next month. They're scared of looking bad." A car door slammed. Warren turned. Across the parking lot, Marcy stood with 3 other women, all of them glancing his way, mouths moving. "Why would Diane do that?" Warren asked, though he was starting to understand. "Can't say, but I've been a pastor 30 years. I know what a wolf looks like, even in sheep's clothing." Ray gripped Warren's shoulder once, firm. "You need anything, you call me. Anytime." Warren nodded, not trusting his voice. He drove home slow, taking the long way past the frozen fields. When he pulled into the driveway, Diane's Lexus was there, but so was Kyle's BMW. Warren sat in his truck, engine running, heat blasting. Through the kitchen window, he could see them. Diane and Kyle at the table, papers spread between them, official-looking documents, Kyle's hand on Diane's wrist, reassuring. Warren shut off the engine. The cold crept in immediately. They were waiting for him in the kitchen. Diane's eyes were red, like she'd been crying, but her makeup was perfect. Too perfect for a headache. "Warren, sit down," she said. Her voice was soft, apologetic, the voice she used when she wanted something. "We need to talk." Kyle stood, extended his hand. "Mr. Hodge, Kyle Brennan. I don't think we've been properly introduced." Warren ignored the hand, looked at Diane. "What's this about?" "Please, just sit." Diane pulled out a chair. "Kyle's a financial advisor. He's been helping me understand our situation." "What situation?" Kyle sat back down, folded his hands on top of the documents like a man used to being in control. "Mr. Hodge, your wife came to me concerned about some tax issues. It seems there's a significant lien on the property. IRS. If it's not resolved by April 15th, they can begin foreclosure proceedings." Warren's jaw tightened. "There's no lien. I pay my taxes." "That's what I thought too," Diane said quickly. "But Kyle showed me the paperwork. It's from 3 years ago. Some kind of filing error that compounded. The penalties? Warren, it's bad." Kyle slid a document across the table. Official letterhead, IRS logo, numbers that made Warren's vision "I don't understand this," Warren said. "That's okay. That's what I'm here for." Kyle's smile was practiced, sympathetic. "I've already worked out a solution. A reverse mortgage. It would clear the debt, give you both some breathing room. You could even use the extra funds to travel. Enjoy retirement. Diane's hand covered Warren's. Her skin was warm, her nails perfect. I know you love this place. But Kyle says if we don't act now, we could lose everything. Warren looked at the document again. His head felt fuzzy, like the blood pressure medication was hitting him wrong. He'd felt like that a lot lately. Tired, confused. Diane had said the doctor wanted him on a higher dose, but Warren couldn't remember the appointment. I need to think about this, he said. Of course. Kyle pulled out more papers. But the deadline is firm. April 15th. I've prepared the paperwork here. Just needs your signature, and we can get the process started. Protect everything you've built. Warren reached for the pen. The pages were dense with legal language. Small print. His eyes caught on something in the header. Not reverse mortgage agreement. Quit claim deed. His hand stopped. He looked up at Diane. Her face had frozen in that apologetic smile, but something flickered behind her eyes, something sharp. This isn't a mortgage, Warren said slowly. Kyle's expression didn't change. It's a hybrid instrument. Technically requires a deed transfer to facilitate. No. Warren pushed the papers back across the table. Stood up. His chair scraped loud against the tile. Diane's face shifted. For just a second before she caught herself, Warren saw pure rage flash across her features. Then she was crying. Warren, please. I'm just trying to help. You're not thinking clearly. Kyle, tell him. But Warren was already walking toward the door. Behind him, Kyle's voice. Mr. Hodge, you're making a mistake. Your wife is trying to protect you. Warren stopped, turned. From what? Kyle smiled. From yourself. The envelope came 3 days later. Cream-colored paper, expensive, no return address. Inside, an invitation, handwritten in elegant script. Mr. Hodge, I would be honored if you would join me for tea. Thursday, 2 p.m. I have something I'd like to discuss. Margaret Chen. An address in the Bluffs. The houses up there had gates. Warren almost didn't go, but Thursday came gray and cold, and Diane was at an open house that would run until evening, and the workshop felt too quiet. He put on his clean flannel, the one without grease stains, and drove. The Chen estate sat behind iron gates that opened automatically as he approached. The driveway curved through bare oaks, past gardens sleeping under mulch. The house was old money, 1920s brick, ivy climbing the walls, leaded glass windows that probably cost more than Warren's truck. Margaret answered the door herself. She was smaller than he'd remembered, elegant in a gray cardigan, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She smiled and gestured him inside, her hands moving. Welcome. Warren nodded, feeling large and clumsy in the marble entryway. She led him to a sunroom where winter light filtered through tall windows. A tea service sat on a low table. Porcelain cups, a ceramic pot, steam rising with the scent of something floral and earthy. Oolong, maybe. Warren wouldn't know. Margaret poured, her movements precise and ritualistic. Then she handed him a notepad and pen, wrote something herself, and turned it toward him. I'm glad you came. I read lips very well, but this is easier for complex thoughts. Your wife called you the obstacle in the parking lot. Why would she say that? Warren's throat tightened. He took the pen, wrote, I don't know. Margaret's eyes, dark, sharp, studied him. She wrote again, I think you do, or you're beginning to. She set down her pen and began moving her hands, speaking as she signed. Her voice was clear, but had that particular cadence of someone who'd learned to speak without hearing themselves. I'm going to teach you something. It will take 5 minutes. Then we'll talk. For the next few minutes, Margaret showed him signs. Simple ones. Help, truth, friend, lie, danger. Her fingers moved with grace, and Warren, who'd spent 40 years reading blueprints and measuring instruments, found his hands could follow. Muscle memory, pattern recognition, truth, 2 fingers from lips outward, like offering something honest. When they sat back down, Margaret poured more tea. The cup was warm in Warren's calloused hands. She wrote, I've been deaf since I was 12. Meningitis. I've learned that people say more when they think you can't hear them. Warren waited. Your wife said something else in that parking lot, to the man with the white teeth. She said, he'll sign. He's too stupid and loyal. Then the farm is ours. The words hit Warren like a punch. He set down his teacup before he could drop it. Margaret's hand covered his, brief and warm. She wrote, I'm very good at reading people, Mr. Hodge, and I'm very good at helping them when they need it. My late husband was defrauded by men like your wife's friend. He died of a heart attack before we could fight back. I won't let that happen to someone else. A door opened somewhere in the house. Footsteps. A man appeared in the doorway. Early 40s, expensive suit, Margaret's cheekbones. He carried a leather briefcase. Mom, I've got those contracts for you too. He stopped, seeing Warren. Sorry, didn't know you had company. Margaret signed something quick. The man's eyebrows rose. This is my son, Ethan, Margaret said aloud, then signed as she spoke. Ethan, this is Warren Hodge. He's going to need our help. Ethan set down his briefcase, studied Warren with the same sharp attention as his mother. What kind of help? The kind you're good at, Margaret said. Warren didn't get home until after dark. The house was cold. Diane still wasn't back. He went to the workshop, turned on the heater, and sat at his bench. In his pocket was a business card. Ethan Chen, CEO, Chen Agricultural Technologies. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, "You're not alone anymore." The door opened. Warren looked up. His sister stood in the doorway, holding a banker's box. Jolene was 64, looked like their father with the same Norwegian cheekbones and ice blue eyes. Warren hadn't seen her in 10 years, not since the fight over who got their grandfather's tools. Jesus, it's cold in here, Jolene said. She stepped inside, set the box on the workbench. I'm not staying long, but I saw something at the courthouse this week that made me think you should know. How'd you find me? You're not exactly hard to track down, Warren. Same farm, same shop, same truck. She pushed the box toward him. I'm a paralegal now, property law. I've been tracking a pattern. Farms in the county, all elderly owners, all foreclosed in the last 2 years. Then I saw Diane's name on a filing Tuesday. That's when I knew. Warren opened the box. Inside were files, maps, legal documents, a map of Rock Island County with 7 red pins. Warren, Jolene said quietly, you're being hunted. She pulled out a document. Names, dates, property transfers, all of them funneled through the same entity, Brennan Holdings LLC, all of them processed by the same bank, First River Valley, where Kyle worked. You need to listen to me now, Jolene said. I know we haven't talked. I know you're still mad about the tools, but family is family, even when we're idiots. She met his eyes. In Warren, they already took 40 acres, northeast section, deed transfer filed in November. Your signature, notarized. Warren's hands went numb. I never signed anything in November. I know. You were in the hospital. Bypass surgery. Jolene's jaw tightened. I checked. She forged it. Warren sat in the workshop until past midnight, going through Jolene's files. The diesel heater rattled. Outside, freezing rain ticked against the metal roof like fingernails. Each document was a piece of a pattern he'd been too close to see. 7 farms, 7 elderly men, all of them gone now, either dead, in nursing homes, or moved away to live with children in other states. Their land sold to Brennan Holdings LLC. Their families scattered. Warren's hands shook as he read. Not from cold, from rage so pure it felt like clarity. The shop door opened without warning. Warren looked up. Kyle Brennan stood in the doorway, expensive coat beaded with rain, face calm as stone. He closed the door behind him, locked it. Burning the midnight oil, old man? Kyle's smile didn't reach his eyes. Diane said you've been out here a lot lately, avoiding her. That's not healthy for a marriage. Warren stood slowly. His hand found the workbench edge. It's 10 o'clock. You're trespassing. I'm helping. There's a difference. Kyle moved deeper into the shop, hands in his pockets, casual, like he owned the place. See, I've been thinking. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The paperwork is simple. Sign the deed transfer, sign the power of attorney, and all this stress goes away. Diane gets what she needs. You get to stay on the farm. Everybody wins. Except I don't own it anymore. Details. Kyle picked up a wrench from the bench, turned it over. You know what your problem is, Warren. You think the world still works the way it did when you were young. Handshake deals, a man's word, all that Norman Rockwell bullshit. He set the wrench down. But it doesn't. The world moved on. You didn't. Warren's jaw clenched. Get out. I'm trying to be nice here. Kyle's voice dropped, lost its fake warmth. But let me be clear. You don't sign those papers by Monday. Diane files for conservatorship Tuesday morning. Emergency petition. Says you're mentally incompetent, can't manage your own affairs, danger to yourself. That's a lie. Doesn't matter. Judge sees a 63-year-old man living alone, can't work a smartphone, shaky hands, confused about finances. Diane shows up crying, talks about how you've been acting paranoid, aggressive, Maybe shows some medical records about blood pressure, stress, how you refuse to take your medication properly. Kyle leaned against the workbench. You'll be in a memory care unit by Friday. Diane becomes your legal guardian. She signs the papers. Farm gets sold. And you get to spend whatever time you have left watching game shows and eating applesauce. The threat hung in the cold air between them. I'm not incompetent, Warren said. Kyle laughed. Old man, it doesn't matter what you are. It matters what a judge thinks you are. And judges are busy. They see the paperwork. They see a crying wife. They sign the order. That's how the world works now. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the lock. You've got until Monday. Be smart. The door opened, closed. Kyle's BMW started, headlights sweeping across the workshop walls as he pulled away. Warren stood alone in the cold shop, listening to the heater tick and the freezing rainfall. Morning came gray and bitter. Warren had slept in the workshop, curled on the old couch with his grandfather's blanket, too angry to go inside the house. His phone buzzed. Text from Jolene. Don't go home. Meet me at Ray's church. Now. Warren pulled on his boots, started his truck. The engine took 3 tries in the cold. 20 minutes later, he stood in Pastor Ray's office while Jolene laid out documents on the desk. Ray stood by the window, arms crossed, face grim. This came this morning, Jolene said. She handed Warren an envelope. Legal paper, official seal, petition for emergency conservatorship, Diane Marie Hodge, petitioner, Warren James Hodge, respondent. The words blurred. Warren sat down hard. Hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday, Jolene said. April 15th. Same day as the deed deadline, Ray said quietly. That's not coincidence. Warren read the petition. Each line was a knife. Respondent displays signs of cognitive decline, unable to manage financial affairs, exhibits paranoid behavior, refuses necessary medical treatment. She filed this yesterday, Jolene said, after Kyle's visit. They were planning it all along. Warren's hands went to his face. 47 years he'd worked this land, paid every bill, maintained every fence, and now his own wife was trying to have him declared incompetent so she could steal it out from under him. There's more, Jolene said softly. She pulled out another document. I've been digging into Kyle's background. He's not from here. Before this, he was in Dubuque. Before that, Wisconsin. I found court records. She spread them on the desk. Case after case, dismissed fraud allegations, sealed settlements, complaints from elderly victims that never went anywhere because the victims died, or their families gave up, or they were too ashamed to fight. How many? Warren asked. 14 that I can confirm. All farms, all elderly men, all within the last 8 years. Jolene's voice was tight. Warren, you're not the first. You're number 15. The room tilted. Warren gripped the edge of Ray's desk. He targets them through church directories, Jolene continued, joins congregations, looks for older farmers, usually widowed or with wives who seem unhappy. He's methodical, patient. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the paperwork is done, and he's moved on. Ray made a sound like a growl. Son of a bitch has been sitting in my pews for 6 months, singing hymns, taking communion. Warren looked at the petition again. At Diane's signature at the bottom, notarized, official. The hearing was in 5 days. A car pulled up outside. Warren moved to the window. A sheriff's deputy was getting out, official envelope in hand. That's for you, Jolene said. They're serving you in public, at your church, so everyone will see. Warren watched through the window as the deputy climbed the steps. Ray went to meet him. Voices carried through the door, the deputy apologizing, Ray's terse responses. Then the deputy was inside, standing in front of Warren, holding out the envelope with that look they all had. Part sympathy, part relief. It wasn't them. Warren James Hodge, I need you to sign here. Through the office window, Warren could see the parking lot. Marcy Stevens getting out of her car, phone already out, watching. 2 other women from the congregation standing by the entrance, staring. Everyone would know by noon. By evening, the whole town. Warren took the envelope. His hand left a grease stain on the paper. The deputy left. Ray closed the door. The 3 of them stood in the small office, the weight of it settling like February ice. 5 days, Warren said. 5 days, Jolene agreed. But Warren, I found something else. She pulled out one more document. A deed transfer from November. Warren's signature at the bottom. You were in the hospital for your bypass when this was supposedly signed. I pulled the surgical records. You were under anesthesia. Warren stared at his own forged signature, the date, the notary stamp. "She's been planning this for months," he said quietly. "Maybe years." Outside, Marcy Stevens was still watching the church, phone pressed to her ear. By dinner, everyone would believe Diane's story. By next Tuesday, Warren could lose everything, Sunday morning. Warren dressed in his good shirt, the one he wore to funerals. His hands were steady now. The rage had burned down to something colder, harder, useful. Diane was already gone. She'd stopped pretending days ago. Half her clothes were missing from the closet. Her perfume bottles, her jewelry box. All of it moved to Kyle's condo, Warren figured. The house felt like a museum of a marriage that had died years ago, and he'd been too busy measuring metal to notice. He drove to St. Andrews through morning fog that hung low over the frozen fields. The parking lot was full. Everyone would be there. Everyone would be watching. Good. Warren walked through the church doors with his head up. The sanctuary went quiet. That particular hush that meant people had been talking about you. He didn't look at anyone. Just walked down the aisle to his pew, third from the back. The service started. Hymns, prayers, scripture. Warren barely heard it. He kept his eyes forward, feeling the weight of stairs on his neck. Then after the sermon, he stood, walked to the front of the church. Margaret Chen sat alone in the second pew, prayer book open in her lap. Warren slid in beside her. The whispers rose like wind through corn. Margaret looked up, surprised. Then she smiled. Warren pulled out the notepad he'd brought, wrote, "Can you teach me more?" She nodded. For the next 10 minutes, through the offering and announcements, Margaret's hands moved in patient instruction. Warren copied, repeated, learned. Family, home, protect, truth. The signs felt good, precise, no room for misunderstanding. Like measuring with a micrometer. You got the truth or you got nothing. Behind them, the congregation churned with confusion and judgment. Marcy Stevens' face was a mask of scandal, but Pastor Ray, standing at the pulpit, watched with something like approval. When the service ended, Margaret signed, "You're brave. Your wife is watching from the back. She's afraid now." Warren didn't turn around. He signed back, clumsy but clear. Good. Monday afternoon, Warren drove to the county administration building. The clerk's office was on the second floor, smelling of old files and burned coffee. He filled out the application at the counter, his handwriting careful and deliberate. Application for controlled burn permit. Purpose, clear brush and deadfall, prepare for spring planting. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, took the form, read it over. "Mr. Hodge, I'm going to need to hold off on this." "Why?" She looked uncomfortable. "We received a call last week. Someone expressed concern about your ability to safely conduct a controlled burn. Given the conservatorship proceedings..." Warren felt the familiar cold settle in his stomach. "Who called?" "I can't say, but until the court matter is resolved, I can't approve this permit. I'm sorry." Warren left the building, the rejected application folded in his pocket. Kyle had thought of everything, even the small things, the bureaucratic threads that could strangle you if you didn't notice them being tied. That evening, Pastor Ray's church basement smelled like ancient linoleum and industrial coffee. A circle of folding chairs sat under flickering fluorescent lights. Warren counted 6 people: Ray, Jolene, Margaret, Ethan Chen, and 2 others he didn't know, Bud Thornton, retired county clerk, and Frank Kowalski, who farmed the next section over. "Prayer circle," Ray said to anyone who might ask. But there was no prayer. Jolene stood at a whiteboard she'd brought, marker in hand. "We have 5 days until the hearing. Here's what we're facing." She drew it out like a battle plan: the conservatorship petition, the forged deeds, the April 15th deadline for both. "Kyle's strategy is simple," Jolene said. "Overwhelm Warren with legal threats, isolate him socially, make him look incompetent. By the time the hearing happens, the judge sees a confused old man and a concerned wife. It's over in 10 minutes. "So how do we fight it?" Frank asked. He was 70, still worked his land alone. His weathered face was tight with anger. "They did this to my cousin in Davenport. Lost his place to a reverse mortgage scam. Family didn't find out until it was too late." "We need 3 things," Ethan said. He'd opened his laptop, pulled up spreadsheets. "Evidence of the fraud, evidence that Warren is competent, and evidence that Kyle is a predator, running a pattern." "I can handle the pattern," Jolene said. "I've got 14 prior cases, similar MO. I'm requesting records from Wisconsin and Iowa courts." "My firm can provide a forensic accountant," Ethan said. "Pro bono. Trace the money through Brennan Holdings, LLC." Bud Thornton cleared his throat. I worked county records for 30 years. I know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. Give me 2 days. I'll map every property transfer Kyle's touched. Margaret signed, and Ray translated. I've been making calls. 7 widows from our church quilting circle. All of them had Kyle's bank send them refinancing offers after their husbands died. High-pressure tactics. 2 of them nearly signed. Warren sat silent, listening to these people. Some he barely knew organize his defense. His throat felt tight. What about the conservatorship itself? Ray asked. Can we fight it? Jolene nodded. There's a loophole. Warren can request an independent medical evaluation. It delays the hearing, and it puts the burden of proof back on Diane. But Warren, she looked at him directly. You'll need to pass cognitive tests. Memory, reasoning, decision-making. If you fail, it makes everything worse. I'll pass, Warren said. His voice was steady. There's one more problem, Ethan said. Even if we prove fraud, even if Warren passes the evaluation, Kyle has already transferred 40 acres. That deed is filed. Reversing it requires a civil lawsuit that could take years. The room fell quiet. Warren stood up, walked to the whiteboard. He took the marker from Jolene, drew a simple diagram. The farm divided into sections. One corner marked in red. My grandfather put a clause in the original deed, Warren said. Land can't be sold outside the family without consent of all blood heirs. He looked at Jolene. You're a blood heir. You didn't consent to that transfer. Jolene's eyes widened. The deed's void. If we can prove it, Warren said. Ethan was already typing. I'll have my lawyers pull the original deed from the records. If that clause is there, and if Jolene files a challenge, Kyle's entire scheme collapses, Jolene finished. The 40 acres revert, and the judge will see he's been trying to steal property he can't legally touch. For the first time in days, Warren felt something like hope. Ray stood, put a hand on Warren's shoulder. The Lord helps those who document everything, he said. Let's get to work. As they filed out into the March cold, Warren noticed the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. The snow was melting, not spring yet, but close. Margaret stopped beside his truck, signed slowly so he'd understand. They underestimated you. That's their mistake. Warren signed back. Not just me. All of us. She smiled, patted his arm, and walked to her car, where Ethan waited. Warren drove home through the dark, past bare fields that would be green soon. In his pocket, the rejected burn permit felt less like defeat now, more like evidence. Wednesday morning, Warren woke to his phone buzzing with notifications. Facebook. He rarely checked it. Diane had set up his account years ago, mostly so she could tag him in photos he never looked at. 17 notifications, all comments on a post Diane had made the night before. His hands felt cold as he read. I'm heartbroken to share this, but I need prayers from my church family. Warren has been showing signs of dementia for months. Confusion, aggression, paranoia. Yesterday he threatened me. I've moved out for my safety. Please pray for him and for me as I navigate this impossible situation. I love him, but I can't help someone who won't accept help. Below it, 43 comments, most of them sympathetic. So sorry, Diane. You're so brave. I noticed he seemed confused at church. Praying for you both. My father had dementia. It's heartbreaking. Stay strong. Marcy Stevens had shared it with her own comment. This explains so much. We need to support Diane during this difficult time. Warren set the phone down. His coffee had gone cold. By noon, 3 women from the church had organized a Support Diane casserole delivery schedule. By evening, the church directory committee had voted to update Warren's status to inactive member. Ray called that night, his voice tight with controlled anger. I fought them, Warren. 4-3 vote. They're scared of controversy, scared of looking like they enabled an unstable man if something happens. It's fine, Warren said, though it wasn't. It's not fine. It's cowardice dressed up as concern. Ray exhaled hard. Council meets again, Friday. I'm bringing your independent medical evaluation results, making them look at the facts. After the call ended, Warren sat in the dark workshop. The heater ticked. Outside, the March wind had teeth. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Last chance to sign. Warren deleted it. Then he walked to his truck. The dog found him first. A stray, some kind of shepherd mix. Maybe 40 pounds of matted fur and ribs. It had been hanging around the barn for a week. Skittish, but hopeful. Warren had left scraps out. Fresh water. Tonight the dog trotted up as Warren approached his truck, tail wagging cautiously. "Hey, girl," Warren said softly. He scratched behind her ears. She leaned into his hand, starved for kindness. He heard it then, an engine idling. Down the road, past the tree line, headlights off. Warren's hand stilled on the dog's head, the BMW, watching. Warren walked back to the workshop like he hadn't noticed. Inside, he killed the lights, moved to the small window. The dog followed, pressing against his leg. 20 minutes later, the BMW rolled away. But something about it nagged at Warren. Kyle was getting sloppy. Desperate, maybe. He'd made this too personal, too visible. Professional conmen stayed in the shadows. Kyle was parking down the road with his headlights off like some jealous teenager. Warren pulled on his coat, grabbed his flashlight. "Come on, girl." The dog followed him to Diane's Lexus, parked outside the house. Diane hadn't been back in days, but the car sat there like a monument to her absence. Warren tried the trunk, unlocked. Inside, a rolling suitcase, a box of her shoes, and an industrial paper shredder. The heavy-duty kind, cross-cut, the type that could turn a document into confetti in seconds. Warren stared at it. The dog sniffed the trunk, whined softly. He lifted the shredder out carefully, carried it to the workshop, set it on his bench under the bright lamp. The waste bin was still half full. Shredded paper, mountains of it. Warren sat down, pulled the bin closer. His hands moved automatically, the same way they'd moved for 40 years when he needed to understand how something worked. He spread the shreds out, started sorting by color, by paper weight, by ink type. The dog settled at his feet, watchful. Hours passed. The heater cycled on and off. Warren's back ached, but his hands stayed steady. He'd been piecing together machines since he was 12. An engine was just parts that fit a pattern. A transmission was just gears in sequence. You learned to see the logic, the way things connected. Paper was the same. He found the first match around midnight. 2 strips that lined up perfectly, part of a signature, part of a date. By 2 a.m., he had a section reconstructed. A deed transfer, not his. Someone named Robert Patterson, property in East Moline. Date, March 2023. Signature that looked shaky, uncertain. Warren pulled out his phone, texted Jolene. "Found something. Need you to check a name. Robert Patterson, East Moline." Her response came fast. "OMG, that's victim number 4. Died in nursing home 6 months after losing his farm. Family thought it was legit sale." Why? Warren took a photo of the reconstructed section, sent it. "Because I'm holding his forged deed." Kyle shredded it, didn't destroy it, just shredded it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Warren, if you can reconstruct these documents, that's physical evidence. That's proof. Warren looked at the bin of shredded paper, at the sorting he'd already started, at his calipers and micrometer and magnifying lens, tools that measured in thousandths of an inch. He'd been a machinist for 40 years. He knew precision, knew how to read patterns that other people couldn't see, knew how to take something broken and make it whole again. "How many documents do you think are in there?" Jolene texted. Warren estimated. The volume, the density, maybe 15, 20. That's every victim. Warren, he kept them all. Probably as insurance or blackmail. If you can reconstruct even half of them. Warren didn't need her to finish. He understood. Kyle's obsession with erasing evidence had created the evidence. The shredder, that was supposed to protect him, had preserved every crime in pieces. Warren pulled the lamp closer, adjusted the magnifying lens. The dog's breathing was soft and steady at his feet. Outside, March wind rattled the barn door. Inside, Warren Hodge began rebuilding the case against the man who'd tried to erase him. His hands didn't shake. They never did when the work was precise. By dawn, he had 3 complete documents reconstructed. By Friday, he'd have 10, and Kyle Brennan had no idea what was coming. Friday night. The workshop was silent except for the heater's low hum and the dog's occasional sighs. Warren had been working for 16 hours straight, only stopping when his vision blurred too much to see the paper fragments clearly. 10 documents reconstructed, 10 forgeries, 10 lives stolen. His back screamed, his hands cramped. But he kept going because stopping meant thinking, and thinking led to the dark places he'd been avoiding. Around midnight, he finally set down the tweezers, rubbed his eyes. The dog lifted her head, sensing the shift. Warren stood, joints popping, and walked to the small shelf where he kept the things that mattered. The shoebox of farm documents, his father's union card preserved in plastic. And there, in the back, a photo he hadn't looked at in years. Wedding day, 1992. Warren 29, Diane 23. They stood on the church steps, her hand on his chest, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. She wore his grandmother's pearls. He wore his grandfather's suit, altered to fit. Warren studied the photo in the harsh LED light, tried to remember what they'd been laughing about. Couldn't. He remembered other things, though. The way Diane had cried when they lost the first baby. How she'd wanted to try again. And he'd said no, not yet. The farm needed too much work. How she'd mentioned Florida once, twice, 50 times over the years, wanting to retire early, see the ocean, live somewhere warm, and he'd said no. The farm needed him, his grandfather's land, his father's legacy, his responsibility. He chose dirt over me for 40 years. That's what Diane had written in her journal, according to Jolene. And sitting here in the cold workshop at midnight, surrounded by evidence of his wife's betrayal, Warren wondered if maybe she'd been right. Not about stealing the farm, not about the forgery or the fraud or trying to have him declared incompetent. Those were choices she'd made, and they were unforgivable. But about the 40 years, about the choosing. Warren set the photo down, picked up his wedding ring, turned it over under the magnifying glass the way he'd turned over thousands of parts in his career, checking for flaws, for tolerances. The band was thin, worn. He'd never taken it off, not in 31 years. He pulled out his micrometer, set the ring between the jaws, applied gentle pressure until the measurement locked. Then he checked the stamp inside. 14K gold. He measured the density, compared it to the specifications he'd memorized decades ago from the machinery's handbook. Did the calculation in his head. Not gold, brass, gold-plated brass. Warren sat very still. She'd bought them together, insisted on this particular jeweler, said these were the ones she wanted. He'd trusted her, believed the engraving, believed the certificate that came in the velvet box, but it had been a lie from the beginning. From the very first day, the dog whined softly. Warren realized his hands were shaking. He thought about his father, sitting in this same workshop 30 years ago, the night before he'd walked into the barn and put the shotgun under his chin. His father had been drowning in debt, terrified of losing the farm, convinced he'd failed everyone. Warren had found him the next morning, 17 years old, coming to help with chores before school. He'd sworn that day, never lose the land, never fail the family, never be weak like his father had been weak. And he'd kept that promise, worked himself to exhaustion, ignored Diane's requests for vacations, for date nights, for a life beyond the fence line, measured every bolt, every angle, every tolerance to perfection, but never measured whether his marriage was coming apart. The phone buzzed. Text from Jolene. Warren, you there? Need to know if you're okay. Ray said you didn't come to dinner. He stared at the message. His sister, who he hadn't spoken to in 10 years because they'd fought over their grandfather's tools. Stupid, petty, the kind of thing that seemed important when you were angry and became meaningless when you needed family. She'd come back, brought evidence, fought for him. And what had he given her? Silence. Mostly. Pride. The same stone face he'd given everyone for 40 years. Warren typed slowly. I'm okay. Working. Joe, I'm sorry. About the tools. About everything. 3 dots appeared immediately. Shut up. We'll fight about it later. Right now we fight for the farm. Deal? Warren felt something crack in his chest. Deal. He set the phone down, looked around the workshop, at the reconstructed documents spread across his bench, at the evidence that would destroy Kyle Brennan and probably send Diane to prison. This was justice. This was what he'd been building toward. But sitting here alone, at midnight, wedding ring measured and found false, Warren understood something he'd been refusing to see. He'd won. The evidence was overwhelming. Kyle was finished. The farm was safe. But his marriage, the thing he'd supposedly been fighting for, had been dead for years, maybe decades. He'd just been too busy measuring metal to notice it rotting. Warren picked up the wedding photo again, looked at the young man in his grandfather's suit, so certain the farm was all that mattered. You fool, he whispered to that man. You stupid, blind fool. The dog pressed against his leg, warm and solid and uncomplicated in her loyalty. Warren pulled out a clean sheet of paper, wrote carefully, the way he'd been taught to document measurements. Things I chose? The farm over Florida, 47 times. The shop over dinner, too many to count. Being right over being kind, every argument. My father's ghost over my wife's voice, 31 years. He folded the paper, put it in his pocket next to the micrometer. Tomorrow he'd finish the reconstructions. Monday he'd go to court with evidence that would bury Kyle Brennan and vindicate everything. But tonight, Warren Hodge sat in his cold workshop and mourned the marriage he'd killed through 1,000 small choices that had seemed, at the time, like the only choices he could make. The dog sighed and settled her head on his boot. Outside, the March wind was gentler now, the hard edge of winter finally breaking. Warren reached down, scratched behind the dog's ears. At least he'd saved something. At least he hadn't lost everything. He pulled the lamp close and went back to work. The paper fragments wouldn't piece themselves together, and there were still 7 documents left to reconstruct. The Rock Island County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and old wood. Warren sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3, Jolene on one side, Pastor Ray on the other. His hands rested on a leather portfolio that held 15 reconstructed documents, each one photographed, indexed, cross-referenced with county records. Margaret sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, Ethan beside her, reviewing notes on his tablet. Bud Thornton stood by the window watching the parking lot. Frank Kowalski had brought 3 other farmers, witnesses, all of them elderly, all of them with stories about Kyle's bank sending predatory letters after their wives died. The forensic accountant Ethan had hired, a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, carried 2 bankers' boxes of financial records, tracing money through shell companies, dissolved LLCs, and offshore accounts. They had everything. Documentation, testimony, physical evidence. Warren's mouth was dry. "You good?" Jolene asked quietly. He nodded. The independent medical evaluation had come back 3 days ago, cognitively intact, no signs of dementia, above-average reasoning and spatial skills. The psychologist had written, "Mr. Hodge demonstrates exceptional precision and attention to detail. His ability to reconstruct complex documents from shredded fragments suggests cognitive function well above age norms." The courtroom doors opened. A bailiff called, "Hodge conservatorship matter? All parties?" Warren stood. His legs felt steady. The portfolio was solid in his hands. They filed into the courtroom. Judge Patricia Morrison presided. 60-some, gray hair, reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. She'd been on the bench for 20 years. Diane sat at the petitioner's table with her attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who looked confident. Kyle sat behind them in the gallery, arms crossed, face calm. Warren took his seat at the respondent's table. Jolene beside him, Ray and Margaret in the row behind, the rest of their witnesses filling the gallery on his side. The judge reviewed her papers, looked up over her reading glasses. "This is a petition for emergency conservatorship. Mrs. Hodge alleges her husband is unable to manage his affairs due to cognitive decline." She looked at Warren. "Mr. Hodge, you're represented by your sister, who I understand is a paralegal?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jolene said, standing. "I'm also filing, at this time, a motion to convert these proceedings to an emergency fraud investigation, based on evidence we've obtained." Diane's attorney stood. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We're here on a conservatorship matter." "I'll decide what's irregular, counsel." Judge Morrison's voice was dry. "Ms. Mackey, approach." Jolene walked to the bench, handed up a document. The judge read, her expression shifting from skeptical to interested. "Mr. Chen," she said, not looking up. "Kyle Brennan, you're in the courtroom?" Kyle stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "You're going to want to stay. Bailiff, I want the county prosecutor notified. Tell him to send someone over." She looked at Diane's attorney. "You might want to advise your client of her rights." The next 2 hours moved like a slow-motion collapse. Jolene presented the reconstructed documents first, laid them out on the evidence table like a machinist's blueprint. 15 forgeries, 15 victims, dates, signatures, notary stamps. All fake, all traced back to Kyle's network. Warren testified about finding the shredder, explained his reconstruction method, using his micrometer to demonstrate how he'd measured paper fiber patterns, matched cut edges, aligned fragments with tolerance down to hundredths of a millimeter. The judge stopped him. "Mr. Hodge, you measured shredded paper?" "Yes, ma'am. Same principle as measuring metal. Paper has grain direction, thickness variation, ink absorption patterns. Every piece has tolerances. You just have to know how to read them." Judge Morrison looked at the reconstructed documents spread before her, then back at Warren. Something like respect crossed her face. "Continue." Sarah Chen, the forensic accountant, testified next. Traced $2.3 million through 14 property seizures over 8 years. Showed how Brennan Holdings LLC was a shell, dissolved and reformed under different names, but always flowing money to accounts Kyle controlled. Margaret testified through an interpreter, described lip-reading Diane's confession in the church parking lot. "He'll sign, he's too stupid and loyal, then the farm is ours." Pastor Ray testified about the pattern of targeting elderly farmers through church directories. Bud Thornton presented county records showing the 40-acre transfer had been filed when Warren was in surgery, physically unable to sign. By the time they finished, Diane's attorney was conferring urgently with his client in whispers. Kyle sat perfectly still in the gallery, face blank, but Warren could see the calculation behind his eyes, looking for exits. Judge Morrison set down her pen. Mrs. Hodge, I'm going to give you an opportunity to address the court, but first, I want you to understand your position. The evidence suggests your conservatorship petition was filed in furtherance of a fraud scheme. That makes you potentially liable for criminal conspiracy, elder abuse, and filing false documents. The county prosecutor is on his way. You may want to consult with counsel before speaking. Diane's attorney leaned close, whispering urgently. She pushed him away, stood up. I want to make a statement, she said. Her attorney grabbed her arm. Diane. Don't. I'm making a statement. Her voice was sharp. She looked directly at Warren for the first time. I'll testify. Against Kyle. I'll tell you everything, but I wanted a deal. The courtroom went silent. The county prosecutor had just arrived, still in his coat. Judge Morrison gestured him forward, explained quickly. He looked at the evidence table, then at Diane. Proffer first, he said. Then we talk deals. Diane took the stand. The bailiff swore her in, and she talked about how Kyle had approached her 2 years ago at a real estate conference, how he'd seduced her slowly, methodically, how he'd shown her the opportunity. Elderly farmers, land rich but cash poor, easy targets if you knew how to work the system, how she'd resisted at first, but then Kyle had shown her the money, shown her the life she could have, the escape from 40 years of cold farmhouses and machine oil and a husband who loved dirt more than her. He said Warren wouldn't even notice, Diane said. Her voice was flat, empty. Said old men like him never noticed until it was too late. And I thought... She stopped, swallowed. I thought he'd be happier, without the burden of the farm, without the burden of me. Warren sat very still. The medication tampering? Jolene asked, making him confused. Kyle's idea said it would help with the conservatorship, make Warren seem... Diane's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. She described the forgeries, the shell companies, the way Kyle had done this 14 times before, how he'd promised they'd disappear after, live somewhere warm, start over. Did you love him? Judge Morrison asked quietly. Diane looked at Kyle. He stared back, face cold as stone. I don't know, she said. I loved the idea of being someone else, someone who wasn't Warren Hodge's invisible wife. The judge turned to Kyle. Mr. Brennan, you have the right to remain silent, but given what we've heard, you might want to speak with counsel before... I want my lawyer, Kyle said. His voice was steady, but Warren saw his hands clench. I'm not saying anything else. Bailiff, Judge Morrison said, take Mr. Brennan into custody, charges pending. 2 deputies moved forward. Kyle stood slowly, adjusting his tie. As they put the handcuffs on, he looked at Warren. You think you won, old man? His voice was low, vicious. You're still alone. You're still 63 in a house that's too big. You saved your dirt. Congratulations. That's enough, the bailiff said, pulling him toward the door. Kyle's voice carried as they let him out. 40 years she wasted on you. The door closed. Silence settled. Judge Morrison looked at Warren. Mr. Hodge, the conservatorship petition is denied. Your property rights are fully restored. The deed transfers are voided. Mrs. Hodge, she turned to Diane. The prosecutor will contact you about your cooperation agreement. Until then, you're released on your own recognizance. But if you leave the county, I will personally ensure you spend the maximum time in prison. Are we clear? Diane nodded. She gathered her purse with shaking hands, wouldn't look at Warren as she left the courtroom. Judge Morrison addressed the gallery. For the victims' families present, the prosecutor's office will be reaching out about restitution. This court will do everything in its power to make you whole. She banged the gavel once. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, April sunlight felt warm on Warren's face for the first time in months. The air smelled different, wet earth instead of frozen ground, something green trying to break through. Jolene stood beside him on the steps, hands in her pockets. You okay? Warren nodded, didn't trust his voice yet. Margaret approached, Ethan behind her. She signed, You fought well. Your grandfather would be proud. Warren signed back, clumsy but sincere. Thank you for everything. The prosecutor called, Ethan said. Kyle's facing 5 to 7 years, bank fraud, elder abuse, forgery. Federal charges might stack on top, And Mom's foundation is setting up a victim restitution fund. We'll make sure the other families get something back. Pastor Ray clapped Warren on the shoulder. Church council wants you back. Unanimous vote. Marcy Stevens actually apologized. Nearly killed her, but she did it. Warren almost smiled. I'll think about it. The group dispersed slowly. Handshakes, promises to stay in touch. Bud and Frank and the other farmers heading back to their land, their lives. Sarah Chin loading her banker's boxes into a rental car. Margaret and Ethan driving away in their Tesla, silent and elegant. Finally, just Warren and Jolene on the courthouse steps. Come over for dinner, she said. Meet my kids. They want to see the farm, see Uncle Warren. I'd like that. She studied his face. You're not okay, though, are you? Warren looked at the sky, clouds moving fast, breaking apart. I saved the farm, lost the marriage. Not sure which one I'm supposed to feel. Feel both. Life's not multiple choice. Jolene bumped his shoulder with hers. And Warren? That micrometer, Grandpa's. I don't want it. He looked at her surprised. You earned it, she said. 40 years of precision, and then you used it to save yourself. That's exactly what he'd want. You keep it. Teach my kids how to use it. That's how we keep him alive. Warren's throat tightened. Thanks, Joe. She hugged him quick and hard, then headed to her car, turned back once. Dinner Sunday, 4 o'clock. Don't make me come get you. 2 days later, Warren drove to the county administration building. Same clerk, same burned coffee smell. He set the application on the counter. The clerk looked at it, looked at him. Mr. Hodge, I heard about the trial. I need that burn permit now, Warren said. She stamped it approved without another word. Saturday morning. Warren stood in the northeast field with a rake and a box of matches. The brush pile was 6 feet high, dead branches, accumulated deadfall, 2 years of growth that needed clearing, and on top, carefully arranged, the forged documents. Copies, not the originals. Those were evidence, locked in the prosecutor's office. But these copies would burn just fine. Jolene's kids watched from a safe distance. 2 boys, 9 and 12, curious and careful. The dog sat between them, tail wagging. Fire's a tool, Warren told them. Like any tool. Respect it, understand it, use it right. He lit the kindling. Flames caught, spread, climbed through the dry branches. The paper documents curled and blackened, turned to ash that rose on the heat shimmer. The boys watched, fascinated. What are you burning, Uncle Warren? The younger one asked. The past, Warren said, making room for what comes next. The fire burned for 2 hours. When it was done, nothing but ash and clean soil remained. Warren took the boys to the workshop after, showed them the tools, the lathe, the drill press, pulled out the micrometer, let them hold it. Your great-great-grandfather used this, he said. Measure twice, cut once. That's the rule. You understand? The older boy turned the micrometer carefully, reading the graduations. It's like, you have to be sure before you do something permanent. Exactly. Did Grandpa teach you that? Warren thought about his grandfather, his father, the chain of men who'd worked this land and broken themselves on it. Thought about the mistakes he'd made, the choices he couldn't take back. He tried, Warren said. Took me a long time to learn it. That evening, Margaret came by with tea. They sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. The dog sprawled at their feet. Robins sang in the oak tree. Margaret signed. What will you do now? Warren signed back. Plant, build, teach. He paused, searching for the signs he'd learned. Live. She smiled, poured more tea. The cup was warm in his hands. April rain started, gentle and soft. The smell of it on warm soil was like a promise. The fields would be green soon. The farm would wake up. Life would continue, different than he'd planned, but continuing. Warren watched the rain and felt something like peace. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but peace. 3 months later. July evening. The workshop door stood open, catching the breeze. Warren sat at his bench, teaching Margaret's grandson, 10 years old, quiet, careful with his hands, how to read a micrometer. See these lines? Warren pointed boidos. Each one is 1/1000th of an inch. You learn to read them, you can measure anything. The boy squinted, tongue between his teeth, turned the thimble slowly. 0.247? 0.247 inches. Perfect. Warren felt something warm in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. The dog barked from the yard. Jolene's car pulling up, her boys tumbling out, racing toward the barn where Warren had set up a rope swing from the hayloft beam. Margaret appeared in the doorway, basket in hand. More tea, probably. Or dumplings. She'd been bringing food every week, never asked if he needed it, just showed up. Warren stood, joints popping, and walked to the door. The fields were green now, corn knee-high and growing. The northeast 40 acres, the ones Diane and Kyle had tried to steal, were planted with soybeans. In the fall, they'd harvest. In the winter, they'd rest. In the spring, they'd plant again. The cycle continued. The land endured. Jolene joined Margaret on the porch, both of them watching the boys play. Ray's truck appeared down the road, coming for dinner. This had become their Saturday ritual. Food, family, the kind of community Warren had forgotten how to build. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, age-spotted. The same hands that had measured metal for 40 years, that had pieced together shredded evidence, that had saved what mattered. In his pocket, the micrometer rested quiet and sure. Warren thought about his grandfather, clearing this land with a mule and faith. About his father, who'd loved it too much to let it go. About Diane, who'd hated it enough to try stealing it. About Kyle, sitting in a federal prison, probably still believing the con was just bad luck. And he thought about himself. 63 years old, alone in most ways, but not lonely, not anymore. "Warren?" Margaret was signing to him. "Dinner ready soon. You hungry?" He signed back. "Always." She laughed, the sound soft and real. The grandson came out carrying the micrometer like treasure. "Grandma, look! Uncle Warren says I measured perfect." "Then you did," Margaret said, signing as she spoke. "Warren only says perfect when he means it." The boy beamed. Warren watched them all, this accidental family built from crisis and kindness, and understood something he'd missed for 40 years. Precision mattered, measuring mattered, getting the tolerances right mattered. But knowing what to measure, that mattered most. He'd measured metal. Should have measured love. He'd measured land. Should have measured time. He'd measured tolerances. Should have measured grace. But maybe that was okay. Maybe you learned by getting it wrong. Maybe starting over at 63 wasn't failure. Maybe it was just late wisdom. The rain had passed. The sky was clearing. Fireflies were starting to rise from the grass, tiny sparks of light against the gathering dusk. Jolene called, "Warren, you coming? Food's getting cold." He took one last look at the fields, his grandfather's legacy, his father's burden, his own hard-won second chance. Then he walked inside to eat with his family. The micrometer stayed in his pocket. But his hands were free.